Republic Commando 000 is the second book in the Republic Commando novel series by Karen Travis. Being completely upfront with this one, I think this is the weakest of the series. This one is about Omega Squad going on an undercover mission to eliminate a terror cell that's working with the Separatists on Coruscant. This one is set around a year after Hard Contact. We see our boys have grown as a unit and have developed more chemistry with each other. They've also been joined by some new allies and some returning ones. Jessic, the Padawan briefly shown at the start of the last novel, is now a lead in this one, and he's a pretty fun character. He's laid back, but serious when he has to be, and he has a deep respect for Mandalorian culture and the clones in general. Etain returns as well, and we get to go more into her relationship with the clones, specifically Darman. More on that later. Delta Squad are in the story now, finally. It's nice to have the actual guys from the thing that kickstarted this franchise in the novels now. We also finally get to see Vo and Scarada after hearing much about them in the previous book. Some entirely new characters for this story include Kor, who is a normal clone trooper that works logistics at a desk job after being severely injured in combat. There is also Bethany, a co-worker of Kor that gets involved with the story. And we get to see Muriel and Ordo, both null arcs. They get relatively large roles in this story, more Ordo than Muriel. To start off with some positives, the new clones are overall very fun additions to the group we had from the previous book. Travis does a good job at making you warm up to them pretty quickly for the most part. Even the clones who are only in the story for a brief period of time feel very unique and like characters that could be fleshed out in other material. Omega and Delta Squad have a friendly, not so friendly rivalry depending on which member of each squad you're talking about. If you enjoyed Delta Squad in the video game incarnation, their characterization in this is pretty faithful to that, and considering Delta are my favorite clones, or at least some of my favorite clones, I feel they were handled pretty well in this book. Kor, as I mentioned, is a pretty cool character. He's missing both of his forearms after being caught in an explosion and is working at a desk job until better prosthetics are available to him. He's pretty unique since there aren't many examples I can think of in regards to clones who are too injured to be on the front lines, or at least clones that are like that are focused on. The closest one I can think of is Echo, but Echo gets taken care of pretty quickly and is back out there fighting in not too long of a time after he's rescued. It's also nice to see Kor just grow as the story progresses. He starts as a pretty mundane clone who's unsure of himself because of his circumstances, and he progresses and finds confidence throughout the story. Ordo is also a clone that's focused on heavily throughout the story. I know I mentioned him and Muriel. Muriel doesn't really show up for most of the story. Ordo is there essentially from the beginning. He's a very abrasive character at the start, especially in the first few interactions that characters we know have with him. As the novel progresses, Ordo begins to become more of his own person, and he grows even more in the following book, and he honestly becomes probably my favorite original clone from the novel series. Vo is a nice addition as well. He's definitely more of a shade of gray than all the other characters we follow throughout the story. There are moments where he seems like a fun guy, pretty classy. You're kind of questioning why he's doing what he's doing. And then there are other points where you remember the stories told about him prior to this book and how he got to where he is in life. Another positive I'll mention are the little intro stories we have prior to the main plot getting underway. We get to see brief missions that Etain, Delta, and Omega Squad are all up to prior to landing on Coruscant. They aren't anything major, but it's fun seeing each individual group doing their thing in the Clone Wars. We also get to see a few of the characters on Coruscant before the plot gets underway, and it's nice to just have a brief establishment point so we can get to know these characters before we get thrown into it. Now moving on to the bad. In contrast to Shadowhunter, another book I've gone over that takes place entirely on Coruscant, the setting of Coruscant isn't really used to its full potential here. There is a chase scene early on in the novel similar to the one we see in the traffic lanes in Attack of the Clones, but that's the only point where you really feel immersed in the environment of Coruscant. The rest of the story feels very vague enough to be just any large city on a planet in the galaxy. We aren't really given good descriptions of locations or characters on the planet in the areas that they're walking around in. It's essentially like a video game where there's just tons of NPCs, but they're not really there to interact with. They're there more for decoration. Or another comparison could be to the Truman Show, where you have the main characters and then the small group of supporting cast that they interact with, and everyone else is just there as an extra to kind of give you the illusion that there is a real town. The pacing of the story is also very spotty. An advantage the first book had was having actual villains with names that you can focus on. When we weren't with the Clone Squad or Etain, we could go to what the villains were up to and have a nice change of pace and liven things up a little bit and see what it's like on the other side of the front, so to speak. In this, the villains are just a vague group of terrorists for essentially 90% of the book. This isn't always a bad thing as far as storytelling goes, of course, but in our case, it doesn't help because we're stuck with certain characters for prolonged periods of time, and if we are to jump to another group of characters, one of those two is most likely with them. Which brings me to the biggest issue I have with the novel. Both Scarada and Etain are really annoying in different but similar ways. In my video about Hard Contact, I mentioned that Karen Traviss sometimes has a knack for really hammering things too much at times, but she really goes into maximum overdrive when it comes to doing that in this book.
You'll never catch me, Crabs. Not when I shift into maximum overdrive. Hi-ya!
Throughout the story, Etain really leans into the whole clones are people too aspect, and she doesn't lay off throughout the entire thing, whether she's talking about it to somebody or she's having an internal monologue, where she goes on about the clones being slaves to the Republic, how it's not fair, they deserve some R&Rs, some retirement after the war, and so on. It's not a bad thing, but it gets to the point where it's just really annoying and you just feel like skipping through those pages or paragraphs where she goes on about that. Another problem is her relationship with Darman goes from 0 to 100 out of nowhere. I'm sure if you've poked around Star Wars YouTube for a while, you've heard about the clone that got a Jedi pregnant. Well, this is where that comes from. In Hard Contact, you could kind of see they might have had feelings for each other to some extent, but it doesn't really seem that open at the end of that story. In this, not too long after meeting up with each other for the first time since Hard Contact, Etain just blatantly tells Darman she loves him without any real build-up in their relationship. From then on, they act as if they've been dating for a fair amount of time, and she goes on talking about how she wants to give him a child and is thinking about her future as a mom, his future as a dad, and what they're going to do after the war, and it just feels very out of left field and injected into the story out of nowhere. The whole situation with the pregnancy and the clone, like, getting a Jedi pregnant is just very sudden and very weird, and it's very uneasy feeling considering you compare their ages. Physically, he is an adult, and she is around 19 years old or so, but he was born only like a couple years ago, so he's technically like 5. So it's just very, it's weird. I don't know. I don't like it. And despite all that, Etain still manages to feel very wishy-washy throughout the story, despite her development in the last book and her time in between the last book and this one. She's a general and leading a vast amount of clones and is in charge of battalions and strategy and all that, but she still doesn't feel that different from where she was about halfway through Hard Contact. Scarada is also really big on hammering in points over and over and over again throughout the story. He shares Etain's pro-clone stance since he views all the clones as his adopted children, and he really wants you to know how much he does not like Jedi. Despite Jusik being a Jedi, he seems to be the only consistent exception, essentially because Jusik is a big fanboy for Mando culture and he's really cool with the clones, so I guess Skirata gives him the pass, but sometimes Atane is an exception. Other times she's the reason for him bringing up his dislike of the Jedi, and they kind of bounce back and forth throughout the book, and it's really annoying because you just want them to pick sides. The other issue is Skirata is universally praised by numerous characters in this book for essentially no reason. In Hard Contact, he would be brought up by his trainees if something he taught them paid off, or if they were struggling to think of a solution, they would try and put themselves in his mindset and what he would say if he was there. In this story, he's just worshipped by a bunch of people, seemingly just for existing. You have the head of security that's working with them on this undercover mission, just saying how great he is. And you have Omega Squad going on, most of Omega Squad going on about how great he is and what a father, and Ordo just can't shut up about him at certain points. And since we're in Atane's head for chunks of the story, there's just paragraphs where she's dying to earn his respect and wanting him to be oh, you're gonna be a great grandfather for this baby and all this stuff. And it just feels completely unwarranted, and it's not a good setup because this is the first time we're actually getting to see this character in person, so to speak, and everyone's telling you how great the character is, and he seemingly doesn't have any flaws in any of these people's eyes, and it gets really annoying. If someone say Fixer were to go and complete an objective, everyone would be like, yeah, good hustle, Fixer, you're cool. But if Skirata were to do it, prepare yourself for half a page of how amazing he is and how awesome that was. This wouldn't really be as much of an issue if there was some opposition to this viewpoint. The closest we get is Vo, but Vo isn't really seriously opposed to Skirata. They have a friendly rivalry, a brotherhood type thing, where they pick on each other and they disagree. And aside from Vo's occasional disagreements, there really isn't any opposition to the uber Skirata love throughout the story. In the end, I really can't give a strong recommendation for this novel unless you're a massive Star Wars fan, or if you're just really into clones and you want to finish this novel series together. I will say the sequel to this one, True Colors, is a much better read than 000. The only thing is, to get to that one, you unfortunately have to trudge your way through this novel. With that being said, thank you for watching or listening to this video. Please like and subscribe. I'll try and get more stuff out to you guys in the near future. And may the Force be with you.